faced with him. And last year we worked on the Nuremberg side, Whitney Harris and Bernie and Henry King and other folks whose lives interspersed in that period of time at Nuremberg, and very consciously have sort of now the Supreme Court side with you and with Murray, Jim Marsh, who's coming in from Philadelphia, George Niebank, who was here. He's originally from Jamestown.
Well, I haven't seen George Niebank's name in the program.
He's not going to be here. He's on vacation, so he's not going to be here this week. But George has been here a couple years ago, and he was a little bit different because he was a Jamestown guy who
right
became the clerk. So this is part of the excitement for us, and to get John on board with us. He's a real scholar. So I'm ready when you are, John.
Well, Phil and I had a previous conversation, and it was a great one, April of 2001. This will repeat some of that. And I
hope, I hope so, because I think I told you all I knew in that conversation.
I have those notes, but as you'll remember, I didn't have a camera, so it's, partly it's replay that. But let's start at the beginning and just get the sort of Phil Neal story. I know you're from Chicago, but you're growing up and schooling and so forth.
I grew up in Oak Park, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. Went through public schools there, through high school there. Went to Harvard College, and when I graduated from Harvard College, I went to Harvard Law School, and then the clerkship with Jackson took me to Washington, where after clerking for him, I joined the State Department briefly, and that took me to San Francisco, where I came to rest for a while. And then I was persuaded to go teach down at Stanford, which I did for 13 years. And then I was persuaded by Ed Levy to come to Chicago. And I moved my family from the idyllic Stanford campus to the south side of Chicago, 4 small boys, and remained there ever since.
You destined to be a lawyer?
Well, I suppose. People have asked me how I happened to become a lawyer, and all I've ever been able to say was that I think I knew from early on that's what I wanted to do, and it was kind of a straight path that I pursued ever since.
Was this something was your father a lawyer?
No. I think my maternal grandfather was a lawyer, but I never knew him, so I never had any exposure to lawyers. I guess my family would say I did a lot of arguing growing up. That destined me to be a lawyer.
What was your parents' background?
Both of my parents came from the deep South. My father was born in a small town in Georgia. My mother was born in Anniston, Alabama. My father's family moved to Bessemer, Alabama early on. My mother's family moved to Birmingham. And I guess they became acquainted through my mother's first job, probably, at a company where my father was working. And they early on moved to Chicago. They're the only members of their respective large families that ever moved out of the deep South. So the rest of the family has always been in the South, the collateral people and so on.
There's a name question I've had since I saw a letter that Jackson sent to Chief Justice Stone during the summer between your first year and your second year, and Jackson was asking Stone if your pay grade could be raised since you would be a second-year clerk.
Oh, good for him. I never knew that.
And Stone said absolutely, but you called your boy Phil, and I assume his name is Philip.
Yes.
And Jackson wrote back, no, it's Phil. Yes. Phil C. Neal.
Yes.
Period.
Yes.
So.
Yes. That's always been a bit of a problem for me because people have always thought that's a nickname. I don't know whether I told you the one time I made best use of that when Tom Clark was giving a talk to the Seventh Circuit Judicial Conference. This is while I was dean of the law school, and I was also on the program to give a talk. And as he was kind of finishing his talk, Clark made some reference to my friend Phil and said, I hope it's all right to call you Phil, Dean, or something like that. And about that time, I had to go up to speak. And it's one time in my life when a bright idea occurred to me at the right moment. So I got up and opened by saying, Justice Clark, it's fine with me to have you call me by my first name, because I've always felt a certain kinship with you, since we both have first names that are really nicknames. And I said, all my life people have been asking me whatever happened to your IP, and I suppose all your life people have been You know, I met a lawyer. That was that was 45 years ago or so. And I met a lawyer in Washington at the ALI meeting this last spring, and he looked at my name tag and said, "Phil with the IP." And he had been at that meeting. He had never forgotten that.
No, that's priceless.
Before we go too far, could I have you move your chair that way about 6 inches? Just to
Okay.
keep those window shades.
I had no idea that was such a good question. That was a fantastic answer.
Well, I'm glad you asked it, because I don't know how many times we changed our own invitations and stuff because we assumed it was Phil until John said, it's Phil,
Yeah.
period.
Well, you may wonder why it's Phil. That's another little story. But I had an uncle in Birmingham who was a pretty prominent businessman later, whose name was Phil Hudson Neal. And the story about why he was called Phil rather than Philip was that he was named after his uncle, who was known as Phil Hudson, because his full name was Millard Middleton Hudson. He was named after Fillmore. My yeah.
Well, that was so profitable. Just in case there's something that it goes to. What does the C stand for in Phil C. Neal?
Well, that's rather good too.
Okay.
Called well. Isn't that appropriate?
Okay. That is great. Another family name?
Yes, it was my mother's maiden name.
Are there background pieces you'd like to touch on before we jump into law school?
Oh, well, going to law school, Harvard Law School. And by the way, you at Harvard Law School, were you with Bill Jackson?
Yes. I thought we would probably
Okay.
get onto that. Yeah, Bill Jackson and I were classmates at Harvard Law School, and of course we got to know each other quite well, and that's really how I became Jackson's law clerk, I think, because Bill told him about me in the time when Jackson was looking for a law clerk. Jackson never did any real searching for law clerks, you know.
Was that?
He didn't go through. I think he would find it pretty incredible what goes on now. These great recruiting and interviewing and weeding out processes.
Right. Now, you had started law school and then got sick and were postponed a bit, weren't
Yeah,
you?
Yeah, yeah. I started law school in the fall of 1940. Would that be right? Yeah, that's right. And I had a series of illnesses that wound up with rheumatic fever in about the middle of the school year, and spent a long time in the infirmary, as a result of which I didn't finish that first year of law school. Also as a result of which I was disqualified in the draft, so I was able to continue. And then went back the next year. And by that time we were kind of accelerating, so when I should have graduated in June of 43, I actually graduated in September of 43.
Now, in that year, obviously, where you're ill, selective service begins, and the law school is depopulated.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
it sort of changed dramatically.
It changed at least between the time I started and the time I finished. It was depopulated.
So how small was the group in those later years, your second year, third year, graduating group?
Well, the class was still pretty big through my second year, I think. It's my recollection. Toward the end of the second year, it got fairly small, and I suppose the group that I ultimately graduated with was, I don't know, maybe 100.
And do you recall how you got to know Bill Jackson?
No, I don't. I think Bill went all the way through. I think we were in the third year all the way together. I got to know one group my first year, and then the group that I became identified with was the following group, and that was the one he was in. And I have no recollection.
Was he on the law review?
He was not on the law review.
He was, in the end, he was, but
Oh, well, that may well be, because he was in the class, I guess he was in the class behind me. He wasn't on the law review by the time I left, I don't think. Or am I wrong?
well, I think that's right. I think he graduates
I'm not sure.
in February of 44, so he's a
Yeah,
group behind
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but he may
but he may have
he may have been
on
on the
third
law
years.
review. I think that may be. I'd have to go back and check the mastheads.
Okay, no, he's in there. He's
Yeah,
in the mastheads.
yeah,
But not as an officer.
yeah. No, so I guess that would be how I got to know Bill.
Now,
Yeah.
was he sort of a celebrity student as a function of having a father who was a Supreme Court justice?
I don't think so. Well, I remember at a week that Wickard against Filburn was decided. You know Wickard and Filburn?
Absolutely.
Some of us were taking a course from Thomas Reed Powell on the Commerce Clause. And I remember somebody, not sure who it was, the day after that decision came down, showing up at class and saying to Bill Jackson, "What are you doing here? Don't you know your father just abolished the course yesterday?"
That's great.
Or for the tape, John, why don't you, or somebody explain that?
Well, sure, you were clerking during Wickard versus Filburn.
No, it was before.
Oh, it was before, obviously.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, because I was at
Right.
the law school. Wickard and Filburn is an important landmark in the expansion of Congress's powers over interstate commerce, because it involved the Agricultural Adjustment Act and provisions of the act that set quotas on growing wheat. It was in this instance. And they had applied this, assessed penalties against a farmer who had a small output of wheat, but produced it mainly for his own consumption on the farm. So it never got near interstate commerce. So the case raised the question whether the Commerce Clause extended to production, which many older cases had said it didn't, and here production that wasn't even destined for interstate commerce. So, so conceptually, it was a really great expansion of the commerce power.
Thank you.
It's an excellent summary. I can tell you're still ready to teach common law. Did you interview with Justice Jackson, or was it simply arranged through Bill as an intermediary that you would be the law clerk?
Well, I know I went down. I was thinking about that and wondering whether it was just all a matter of correspondence. I guess I got a letter from Jackson, and I did go down. And about the only thing I really remember about that interview is that he asked me when I would be taking the bar exam, because I was graduating in September, sometime in September, and close to when the term of the court was starting. And I said that the only bar exam that I knew of that I was eligible to take was the Illinois bar, which was sometime in that period. And I hadn't really decided whether to do it or not. And Jackson said, delay coming if you have to, but take the bar exam. He said that when he was chief counsel of the Bureau of Internal Revenue, his prime assistant had been Arthur Kent. And that when he moved on to another job, he recommended to FDR that Arthur Kent be made his successor. But they ascertained, or maybe Jackson knew, that although Arthur Kent was a distinguished tax lawyer, he'd been in the government all this time, he'd never been admitted to the bar anywhere. And FDR said he couldn't appoint somebody to that job who wasn't a member of the bar. So Jackson said, you take the bar. See? First chance you had. So I did that.
Did that delay you at all in your?
I don't think it did. I'm not sure I was there on the opening day of court, but I was there very near the beginning.
And it was just you. Those were the days when it was just one clerk?
Just one, yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Did you have any chance to interface with your predecessor?
Yeah, I did. And how did that come about? It must have been very briefly. I knew my predecessor, John Costello, who had been treasurer of the Law Review when I first joined the Law Review. I think that's right. So I knew him. And had some conversations with him about the clerkship, and I don't know, I think that must have been right at the beginning when I went to Washington. I think John, I don't know whether John served 2 terms. He must have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you were the second clerk starting
Yeah,
in Jackson's third term.
Yeah.
Do you know how John came to be hired as the initial law clerk?
Don't know. Don't have any idea.
How were you still available, given the other systems that were feeding Harvard talent toward the court? Was Jackson
Well, I think this must
early
have.
enough, or?
Well, I think it must have come pretty early. Because I don't remember. I really don't. The only other clerkship thing that I remember being approached about was I was in my office at Gannett House in the Law Review, and I looked out one time and I saw Calvert Magruder pedal up on his bicycle. I don't know whether you know who Calvert Magruder was.
The First Circuit.
The First Circuit.
Right.
Yeah,
I
very.
didn't know he rode a bicycle.
Very well, and he was still teaching some at the Harvard Law School. I think he was still teaching some. Anyway, So then he appeared in my office and asked me if I would be his law clerk, and I had to tell him I had already committed myself to Justice Jackson. I would have liked to clerk for Magruder.
Was it unusual in your time for someone to be a first-time clerk at the Supreme Court?
No, I don't think so. The business of serving, I mean, a lot of them had,
Right.
but it wasn't universal the way it's
Okay.
become now.
What other Harvard systems were in place? Like, who was picking for Frankfurter at the time you were a law student?
If anybody, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that. Paul Freund, of course, was in Washington in the Solicitor General's office, so it wasn't he.
Was Henry Hart there when you were a student?
Henry Hart wasn't either, I think. I think Henry, well, I think he was a member of the faculty, but I think he was off doing something.
Okay.
I don't think he was there. I would have had him if he had been there.
Who of your law school classmates became a co-clerk at the court with you?
I don't think any did. I think Murray is the next one I remember being of my generation at the law school. Murray came before Curlin, and Curlin came after Murray. Curlin,
Came to Frankfurter.
yeah, I'm trying to think whether Curlin, I sort of think Curlin clerked for Jerome Frank first and then to Frankfurter. And I know that T.R. Powell had a lot to do with Curlin going to Frankfurter, I think. But whether Powell was regularly nominating people for Frankfurter's clerkship, I don't remember. I don't know.
Was your dean, when you were a student, Jim Landis?
He was nominally the dean, but Eddie Morgan was acting dean, which I remember rather well, among other reasons, because when I left to go to Washington after I graduated, Morgan was congratulating me and wishing me well and so on. And he said, and don't fail to give my regards to Justice Black. And I said, okay. And he said, yeah, tell him to go to hell for me, will you?
Did you ever pass that story along to Jackson?
I don't know. I probably did, yeah.
It sounds like one he would have
Yeah,
enjoyed.
yeah, I'm sure I must have, yeah.
What was the law school perspective, if there was such a thing, on Robert Jackson as a lawyer, attorney general, become rookie justice?
You know, I don't really think there was one. It was pretty early. I mean, no doubt particular opinions, like the one we talked about a few minutes ago, would have received attention. But I don't remember there being any view about Jackson. I don't remember that I had any, aside from knowing that he was a New Deal figure who had gone on the court and was making a name for himself. If there was a view, I think it was a very, very favorable view, but I don't remember anything particular about it.
Was he perceived as somebody with any political future at this time when you're a law student becoming a law clerk? Or
Well, he was perceived as somebody who had had a political future and had more or less abandoned it, I think. You know, he was very much talked about as a potential candidate
Right,
to succeed FDR.
right. But I think of that as sort of 1940, and once Roosevelt becomes a third termer and Jackson becomes a justice, is Jackson still somebody who's a political name, or is he now just a law name?
I think just a law name. I don't ever remember any talk about Jackson as a, maybe there was and I don't know about it, but I certainly don't remember talk about Jackson as having any possible political future. There was about Douglas. Then Jackson was kind of contemptuous of that, I think. I never heard Jackson say anything that remotely suggested that he thought of any political office after he went on to court.
Did Jackson ever reminisce or discuss with you the sort of political season in his earlier years? And
I don't think so. I don't really think so. It was a long time ago.
I understand.
Oh, yeah, that's the most important question. Was he interested in baseball at all?
Never got the impression he was.
We don't either, so I'm looking for that one person who would say that.
No, I don't remember his, yeah.
There's a disconnect in my interest in all this.
I don't remember his being interested in sports and that kind of thing. His great recreational interest, of course, was camping and horseback riding in the mountains and stuff. But I don't remember any small talk about it, who was doing what.
It's unanimous now.
Is it?
Yeah.
Good.
So, any other law school stuff? Let's.
You can go right into Jackson, yeah.
Okay, well, tell us about being the law clerk. How one got oriented and what the work pattern was.
And the first person you probably walked and met was Ruth Sternberg.
Sure.
Talk to us about Ruth Sternberg.
Yeah. Ruth Sternberg was a very admirable lady. Who my wife always thought, and I guess I could have shared that thought, always had very tender feelings about Jackson. Maybe if things had been different, I'm not sure that's right, but I think there's some possibility that was right, and that maybe eventually she left because nothing ever developed with Jackson. I mean, that's pure speculation. I do know I don't know when she decided and why she decided to leave. I don't know to what extent the choice of Elsie Douglas influenced her leaving or came about only because she had already decided to leave. I mean, all that's pure speculation. But Ruth was not a highly sophisticated lady. She came from up around here, I think.
You'll see her house tomorrow.
Really? Yeah. And I think she had been at the Justice Department and came over. Whether she worked for Jackson there, I'm not sure, but she came over, I think, to the Supreme Court when he came to the court. And she maintained friendships with people in the Justice Department. I used to hear her making luncheon dates with her woman friends from the Justice Department. But my impression is that she lived a pretty quiet life, and was very good at what she did, and totally nice.
Was there somebody on the court that was sort of your mentor, other than Justice Jackson? Was there another clerk that you sort of leaned on to be able to walk you down the halls and tell you, give you the sense of the ropes?
I think the answer to that is no, probably. I had a good friend, or we became good friends, co-clerk for Douglas, Eugene Beyer. We became very good friends, and our families are, after we were both married, the couples were very friendly. And he and I used to talk a good bit about our work. And all of the clerks from time to time would consult with the chief's clerks for guidance on some things. But other than that, I really don't remember being guided by or leaning on other clerks, and that partly because of the way Jackson used his law clerks, or partly because of the function, because he didn't have us doing drafts of opinions, so it wasn't the kind of effort where a lot of interchange would have been useful, I think. Pretty soon got the hang of how to do certain memos and didn't need much consultation. There wasn't, as I recall, there wasn't much discussion of, well, what are you going to do about this one and that one? I think as a law clerk, I worked very much the way I think Jackson worked as a judge. It was, I don't think Jackson would have encouraged or particularly welcomed much inter-chambers shop talk, and maybe that sort of set the pattern. But I think I remember pretty much doing my own stuff from the beginning. And you asked about one of your questions was about what kind of orientation and instruction Jackson gave at the beginning. I don't remember us doing any. I mean, I think it was here's a bunch of certs and start doing them.
Okay.
I may be blotting out stuff that I should remember. But
Well, again, for the benefit of the camera, explain that process. of
yeah.
cert petition.
Yes. Well, the principal task of the Jackson law clerk in my time, at least in my first year, was doing what we call cert memos. Each week, each justice's chambers would receive a stack of briefs, which consisted of petitions for certiorari and oppositions for cert, to decide whether cases would be taken by the court. And the standard procedure, I think, for almost all the justices, was to have the law clerk write a memorandum summarizing the case and analyzing the pros and cons of taking the case, and ultimately making a recommendation, grant or deny. And you tried to do that in one page or maybe 2 pages. And there were something like 20 to 25 of them a week. So that was in itself a pretty full-time job. Sometimes I think maybe at a later time, Jackson did more taking the cert petitions and dealing with them himself. But in my time, I think I did cert memos on practically every cert petition that came in, except the prisoner appeals, the in the form of pauperous papers, which were not printed. They were circulated in the original form in which the prisoner had prepared his pleading, covered with blue paper and bound up in pink ribbon. And they were mostly pretty worthless, but they all had to be gone through. And I think in some chambers, law clerks did memos on the informers, but Jackson, almost from the beginning, I think, would always just take those and do them himself. And I'm sure that's because he could very quickly decide there's nothing to this, and it was much more efficient to do that.
You prepare your memo, you hand it to Justice Jackson. Does the justices now, each armed with the memos in hand, discuss whether or not they're going to grant certiorari?
Well, then they don't do that until they get to conference. I think ordinarily, I don't think there's much was ever much advanced discussion of cert petitions. So there may have been in some cases, and you can imagine instances in which some justices would want to know how others are going to vote on it, and maybe some lobbying. I don't know how much that goes on cert petitions as distinguished from deciding cases on their merit. I don't think much of that went on when I was there. And I rather think there was less talk between Jackson and other justices about the business of the court, certainly prior to a conference on the case, than was true of maybe some others. I mean, it may be that Murphy and Douglas or Murphy and Black talked more about cases, but Jackson, by and large, I think, pretty much wrote his own vote. I mean, you've doubtless heard from others about the motto that Jackson had over his fireplace, in a framed, embroidered something or other. He travels the fastest who travels alone.
Would he read certs for himself, or would he rely on your memos?
I think by and large he relied on the memos. He must have, from time to time, gone to the cert petition itself. But my impression is that he pretty much relied on the memo.
I think some of the later law clerks got a little protocol memo or an orientation memo on, this is how you review certs, and write up a little cert memo, and this is where you hang your hat.
From him, you mean?
From the chambers, yeah.
Oh, well.
It sounds like that wasn't the drill in
No,
your day.
there wasn't any such thing, yeah.
Did you have a sense of his footing or comfort level at the court by the time you got there? Was he still learning the job, or was he?
No, he
No,
was
he was
completely at home and comfortable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was he enjoying it?
Yes. Yeah. That was always my sense, that he enjoyed it very much. Jackson was somebody who never came to work, I think, without seeming that he was on top of the world and enjoying things. I never saw him down at the mouth. Jackson to be on an even keel all the time, and I think enjoyed his work.
Did you fraternize with a specific justice or two that you're aware of? Was there a close linkage? I know you always hear about Frankfurter, but were there other ones who he would lunch with or dine with?
I'm not aware of his lunching or lunching with others, except when the court lunched as a group, which I guess they did pretty regularly. The only one that he fraternizing would be too strong a word, but that he exchanged views with a lot, I think, was Frankfurter, and that was mostly because Frankfurter would pop into our chambers. I mean, I don't know how often Jackson might have walked into Frankfurter's chambers. I wouldn't, but my sense is that the discussions came about because Frankfurter, who was a kind of energetic beaver going around the halls, would pop into the chambers, and I think he usually came through my office, which was our chambers were right at the gate, and the secretary's door, I think, was beyond the gate. Mine was inside the gate, and Frankfurter would come in and pop in through that way. So he was in a fair amount. But I don't really, since others didn't do that, I'm not sure I can remember any other member of the court coming into the chambers. I sort of infer from that Jackson wasn't doing that either, but I don't have any way of knowing that.
Can you answer a specific case, John? Are you gonna?
Well, I wanted to ask a little bit more about the college.
Sure.
Did you have a sense of cordial and less than cordial relations? Or was that sort of Jackson's private business?
Well, my sense would be that his relations with Douglas and Black were not really cordial, but I guess I know that only from the way he talked about them.
Okay.
And he certainly didn't conceal his adverse opinion of much that both of them did, and of their outlook as he perceived it on the court.
Elaborate on that. What kinds of comments would he share with you?
Well, I remember his talking on more than, I don't mean talking at length, but just expressions, or a sentence or two about Douglas's cynicism. He regarded Douglas as a very cynical person.
Hey, hi, Tom. How are you? This is Murray Gardner's son, Tom.
Oh, Tom, I didn't recognize you with the decoration.
Murray?
Yeah. Hi, Murray. Good to see you.
Hey, Murray.
Join the fray.
Yeah.
You get this whole interruption on tape.
Greetings. Hey, Murray. Yeah. We're going through the Phil Neal story here.
He and Douglas had been friends. Did he ever discuss?
I didn't know that he and Douglas had ever really been friends.
Yeah, real friends.
Real friends?
Real friends.
At what stage would that have
I
been?
think 36, 37.
You mean on the court?
No, before the court.
No,
Before the court.
before the court. Yes.
I think they really liked each other.
Really, I wonder what brought them together.
Things like SEC work,
Mm-hmm.
death penalty for holding companies, those kinds of projects that Jackson got pulled into.
Well, I can see where they would have been drawn together or have to work together, but from the way Jackson referred to and talked about Douglas when I was there, I would never have guessed that they had been good friends. I'm curious whether Murray has any different impression about that. So I would not have expected that their relationship was particularly cordial, and I find it hard to believe that there was much cordiality ever between Black and Jackson, because Jackson regarded Black as manipulative, I think, maybe more than he did Douglas. I think he regarded Douglas as being cynical and not terribly devoted to what he was doing on the court, whereas he saw Black, I think, as not in every case, of course, but where it might be of interest to Black. He was primarily concerned with seeing that the case came out the way he thought it ought to come out. And of course, Black was a terribly good advocate in his opinion writing. His opinions are really very convincing. But I think Jackson felt, of course, everybody thinks that a judge with whom they disagree has ignored the facts or distorted the facts or something. But Jackson certainly thought that Black made the facts do whatever Black wanted them to do. And I think Jackson did not have great respect for Black's character, or maybe it's the way he characterized him, but he talked about Black as having an underdog complex, and that was, kind of alien to Jackson's way of looking at the world.
What about Stanley Reed?
If I can just continue
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
on the Black
Please,
thing
of course.
for a moment. I'm remembering what I think maybe Frankfurter said about Black rather than Jackson. This is an additional comment. I think I remember Frankfurter saying, when Black isn't sure he's got the votes on a case, he discusses it very energetically. But if he thinks he's got the votes, he won't engage at all. He'll just say, Mr. Chief Justice, I take the other view. And that greatly annoyed, I think I'm attributing this correctly to Frankfurter. But I think Jackson would have probably shared that view. Reed, in my recollections, is kind of a cipher. I don't have much impression about Reed or what Jackson thought of Reed. I remember what Frankfurter thought of Reed.
Which was?
Well, I remember saying that Reed would say, well, I may not be the brightest legal mind ever, but I have judgment or wisdom or something like that. I mean, I distinctly remember Frankfurter repeating something like that in quite a contemptuous way.
And these normal settings where you'd have conversations with Frankfurter would be when he would come into your office or Jackson's office and have these conversations, or are you just talking there?
Well, I don't think I was ever present when the two of them were talking. I suppose they would be. They might be when Frankfurter would come into my office and stop to chat a bit. But I have did know Frankfurter thereafter a little bit outside, and so I don't know whether this kind of thing would have come out when Phil Curlin and I were having dinner with Frankfurter one time or what. But that does stand out in my mind, and it seems quite plausible.
What about Frankfurter? What would Jackson say about him?
Nothing ever adverse. I don't really remember his talking about Frankfurter. I mean, it was clear that he had great respect for Frankfurter and Frankfurter for Jackson, and they were cordial. And I don't remember Jackson ever saying anything disparaging or critical of Frankfurter, even though they disagreed on things from time
What
to
about
time.
amused or bemused?
I don't even remember that. I mean, it could be, but I have no specific recollections.
Chief Justice Stone? Jackson's views on him?
Oh, it would have to be just inference, I guess. I think Jackson respected Stone, but I think he would have said that Hughes was much more his type than Stone. Not that Hughes was there, but I had the sense that Jackson had great respect for Hughes. And I don't think he put Stone on any kind of a pedestal. But I don't remember negative things
Right.
that he said about Stone. There again, I remember Frankfurter saying some negative things about Stone. Not of a very harsh kind, but I think he felt that Stone let people talk too much or was too undirective.
Was Jackson waiting to become Chief Justice? Not in a ghoulish way, but
No, I never had any such sense at all. I mean, in retrospect, I can see that he might well have thought that he was a natural person to be made Chief Justice, as he certainly was in many respects. But I never had any sense of ambition or of his thinking he was a leader of the court or that he was better than anybody else. I think he was doing his job and really more interested in the ideas and in the writing and the deciding of cases than he was in place or position or prestige.
outside of the court, did he have any contact with any of his colleagues that you knew of?
I don't really know anything about that. I don't know that he did. I don't know that he didn't. They were not his natural social companions. He had a group that he had been with at the Justice Department, and maybe other relationships, like maybe the Douglas one at some time had been. I don't know. And I think when he organized social occasions, so far as I know about those. I don't know. I really have no idea what socializing, if any, he did with any other members of the court. I do know that he socialized with Ben Cohen and Tommy Corcoran and Frank Shea. I'm not sure I can remember
Gordon Dean.
others. I don't remember Gordon Dean. And I'm remembering this just from one or more. There might have been more than one parties at Jackson's house that he included me in, and from his talking about these people from time to time. I think his relationship with Frank Shea was particularly close, and I think he had Shea at Nuremberg with him.
What about cases?
3 weeks ago, we had Fred Korematsu here at Chautauqua Institution. And it was fun for us to get to touch the hem of a guy whose name of a student. We had a large throng of law students come down and join us. Obviously, one of the reasons he chose to leave his San Francisco Bay while he's anticipating the World Series was the fact of this Robert Jackson Center, and the fact there was a dissent written by Robert Jackson. And you were there at the time. Maybe a little bit of background, or if you recall, as to when that case came before you, whether there was any discussion regarding the Korematsu case.
Well, the Korematsu case, of course, wasn't assigned to Jackson, and what he wrote was a dissent, and mostly I didn't know when Jackson was thinking about or doing a dissent, and I would be likely not to see it until he had an opinion. And you got to understand that unlike some justices with their clerks, as I assume, I know they do today, he didn't have me come in and discuss cases with him. I mean, he knew what he wanted to do. He did what he wanted to do. And when he had an opinion, he would put a draft on my desk. So I don't remember what I knew about the Korematsu case. I must have been aware of it and its existence and so on. But of Jackson's position, I don't think I knew anything until he put the draft of the opinion on my desk. And I do remember it as one of the cases that troubled me most about his position. But I don't remember any drawn-out interchanges with him about it. I've seen the memorandum that I wrote, which John extracted from somewhere, and I think the scenario must have been that he put the draft on my desk, and knowing his way of doing things, I knew that if I was to have any impact at all on it, I had to get something out right away, because I think my memorandum bears the earmarks of something that I wrote off the top of my head after reading it. But as I said to John, the case, that his position in it always troubled me, and I never quite figured out what was wrong with it, or what he should have done holding the views that he did. But in retrospect, I think it was one of his worst opinions. It was, in a sense, kind of irresponsible, because what would he do about habeas corpus for somebody found in this position? I didn't have the benefit of seeing Frankfurter's opinion, because it hadn't been written. It was written sort of in response to Jackson's, I think. But I thought Frankfurter was right, and I thought there were other reasons why his position was wrong. And I think I remember some interchange with him about this, some ongoing discussion. Whether he changed his opinion in any significant ways in response to that discussion, I don't know. But it troubled me very much.
I'm going to change the taper for a second. Now I'm going to ask you specifically what I'm troubled. This is terrific.
Do you want a glass of water or?
Yeah, I could use a little water, yeah.
Break?
Let's take those to that.
Coming off, I have no idea where the water is.
Well, we'll find out. This sounds good for me. Tom, you met Linda?
Yeah, I don't know if she remembers.
Think how long ago it was?
Well, it was probably when I was in college. Which would have
Some family wedding.
You must have seen him. Well, you know, Tom was at the university. You know that. He went to the college there, and we saw him. We didn't see it enough. No, but your sister's wedding.
my sister's wedding.
Marion's wedding. That was Marion's. I don't know whether you know the story about that wedding. Did you know at the time? You probably didn't.
He almost lost Phil. Did he tell you that story? He almost died at that wedding.
Yes, yes. Yeah, yeah,
No wonder it stands out in your mind.
yeah. Yeah.
It's absolutely mandatory Heimlich. He took, he greeted the family and taken a little half potato with a little caviar on the top and popped it in a biscuit. And then he did what everybody does. He wandered off into a far corner of the room to try to do his coughing. At least he didn't go to the men's room. And we were supposed to go and find tables to sit down. And I was doing that, but then he wasn't there, and I was looking around for him. I saw him across the room, but I went over to him, I looked at him, and I said, should I do a Heimlich?